The rain began in the afternoon and turned into a downpour by nightfall. Heavy, cold droplets pelted rooftops, splashed onto the streets, and tapped relentlessly against the windows of every home in the small town of Bellwood. Trees swayed under the gusts of wind, and neon signs flickered as if resisting the encroaching darkness. By midnight, the entire town seemed swallowed by an impenetrable blackness. No one ventured outside except for one creature. It moved slowly through the narrow alley behind the closed supermarket. Its fur was matted with water and mud, clinging in large patches to its emaciated frame. One of its hind legs dragged behind, a remnant of a kick or accident it could no longer recall. Its stomach was sunken, each step driven by the gnawing hunger within. No one called its name. No one remembered it had once been Benji, a name a little girl had once shouted across a summer lawn. Now it was nameless, just another shadow in the darkness, a familiar sight people often ignored, a stray dog. It paused beside a trash bin, using its nose to nudge aside old cans and sniff at plastic bags. Nothing edible, no one around, only the sound of rain and wind. Then it heard that sound. At first, a hiccup, very faint, very strange. It tilted its head, ears perked. In the rainy street, it was a sound that shouldn't exist. Again, the sound, softer now as if pleading, a baby's cry. The dog stopped completely. It looked up, approaching the thin forest lining the roadside. Without hesitation, it left the alley and crossed the cold grass and dense bushes, its paws muddy, nose alert in the darkness. The crying grew clearer, and then it saw. A foam box is the kind used to store fish or food, old, misshapen, covered in dirt and leaves. Inside was a newborn baby, wrapped only in a thin cloth, skin bluish, lips dry, eyes tightly shut. The tiny body curled up against the cold. The baby breathed rapidly, its little hands trembling as if trying to grasp something in a dream. The dog approached, sniffing gently. The scent of milk, tender skin, cold and fear, all made it pause. At that moment, within a heart once abandoned, beaten, and forgotten, something stirred. An unnamed memory, an indescribable feeling. It acted. No one had taught it how to be a hero, but it bent down, gently grasped a corner of the box and began to pull. The mud was slippery, the bushes obstructed, but it didn't stop. Each time it slipped, it got back up and continued. It took nearly half an hour to drag the box to the edge of Highway 17, where occasionally cars would pass, even though on such a rainy night it was rare. It placed the box in the middle of the median, then stood there, soaked, shivering, and began to bark. The barking echoed through the rainy night like a plea from a forgotten world. It didn't know if anyone would hear, but it kept barking, and when it had no strength left, it whimpered. When no one stopped, it returned, curled around the box and pressed its thin body against the cold foam, using its frail frame to provide a sliver of warmth. It didn't sleep. Eyes open, ears listening. The rain still fell, the wind still blew, but on that cold night, a nameless dog was keeping a nameless baby alive, solely with a heart that no one had ever taught how to love. The rain ceased by dawn, but the air remained thick with the scent of cold, damp earth. Streets glistened, puddles reflecting the drifting gray clouds above. A morning like any other, if not for something extraordinary waiting at the end of the red dirt road leading to the highway. Margaret Lowell, 56, a retired teacher living alone in a small wooden house just minutes from town, had a routine. Each morning, she carried an old umbrella and homemade bread to share with stray cats near the old library, a habit neighbors playfully dubbed her ritual of kindness. But that day she felt an unnamed unease. As she turned the familiar forested corner, something made her stop. On the wet ground, near the local bulletin board, lay a peculiar sight. A large dog covering a white object, as if protecting something more precious than life itself. Margaret approached slowly, heart pounding with each step. The dog, appearing to be a malinois no longer young, lay still, its gaunt body and fur matted with mud and dried blood. It looked up at her, eyes deep as if having witnessed a lifetime. Before it was an old soaked cardboard box, padded with branches and plastic bags. One corner had come loose, and from within came a soft whimper. Unmistakably, a baby's cry. Margaret nearly collapsed. Instinctively, she removed the box's lid. There, amidst the soaked thin blanket, was a baby boy, no more than a few days old. Pale skin, lips tinged blue, body trembling in short bursts as if losing its last warmth. "Oh my God," she whispered, tears welling instantly. She removed her shawl and wrapped it around the baby, holding him close to her chest while dialing emergency services. Her hands trembled so much that she had to dial twice to get the number right. "There's a baby, I think, abandoned, and a dog. It sheltered him all night." Just 10 minutes later, sirens wailed along the highway. An ambulance and police car arrived, lights flashing against the soaked trees. Medical personnel quickly took the baby, checking vital signs. A man in a red jacket looked up, voice grave. "The baby's severely hypothermic. Another half hour and—" He didn't finish. Margaret turned to the dog. It still lay there, unmoving, as if it had just completed its mission and now sought rest. A young officer knelt, placing a hand on its neck to check for a pulse. "Alive, but exhausted," he said. "It probably hasn't eaten in a week." An older nurse nearby sighed. "What a smart dog." Margaret gently touched the dog's head. It didn't react, only whimpered softly. She leaned down, whispering through the misty air. "Thank you. Without you." They placed it in an emergency veterinary vehicle. Someone asked Margaret what to call it. She looked at the baby in the incubator, then back at the dog. "Call him Finn." Because even though no one named him, today, he just began a new life. That morning, the name Finn began to echo through the halls of the hospital, across the pages of the local newspaper, and by afternoon, spread across social media like a tidal wave of emotion. Stray dog shields abandoned newborn through storm, an act that silenced an entire town. The baby was named Noel, which means light in the night. Doctors later said, without the body heat from Finn, the baby never would have made it. An unnamed soul had saved another forgotten life. And from that moment on, Finn was no longer just a stray. He was a silent hero. The beginning of a family that no one ever planned, but fate had written in the rain. St. Alden's Hospital sat quietly on the northern edge of Bellwood, a small but warm place surrounded by maple trees stripped bare by the storm. Inside the neonatal unit, a soft amber light glowed. In the corner, an incubator hummed softly, a fragile but steady sound, the rhythm of life slowly coming back. Noel, the baby not yet a week old, lay swaddled in a layer of gentle cotton. His cheeks had turned slightly pink. One tiny hand twitched as if reaching out in sleep. Though still weak, the doctors couldn't hide their amazement at how quickly he was recovering. An older physician murmured in awe, "A newborn, surviving a freezing night like that? Without Finn, there's no way." In another corner of town, at the local animal clinic, Finn was curled on a heated pad inside a medical kennel. His body was skeletal, with a rear leg badly swollen, and his lungs showing signs of infection. But what puzzled the nurses most was this: he made no sound, showed no fear, no pain. He just lay there, his eyes occasionally drifting to the door, as if waiting for someone. That someone came. Margaret. She stepped in with a basket of yarn, a hand-knitted blanket tucked under one arm, and a few crunchy dog biscuits in a napkin. When the door swung open, Finn lifted his head, weak but unmistakably aware. His eyes brightened, recognizing the woman who had saved both his and Noel's lives. She sat beside the kennel, slipped her fingers through the grate, and gently stroked his head. "Hey there, buddy. Feeling any better today?" Finn licked her hand. No rush, no desperation. Just a quiet, grateful gesture. Margaret smiled softly. "Looks like neither of us had anyone left, and somehow we found each other." 3 days later, both Noel and Finn were declared stable. But when a caseworker came to begin the usual process for an abandoned infant, temporary foster placement, legal documentation, Margaret said something that made the entire room go silent. "I want to adopt them, both of them." The young woman blinked. "Both?" Margaret nodded. "This isn't an emotional decision. I've lived alone long enough to know when my heart is finally calling for a family." The caseworker looked up, startled by the strength in her voice. "Even just temporarily," Margaret added, her eyes softening. "But I can't let Noel go. Not when he's already found his big brother." Their first day home wasn't marked by celebration. There were no balloons, no party. Just an old wooden cottage at the edge of a quiet hill, a soft blanket spread near the fireplace, and 2 lives resting side by side. Noel in his cradle, sleeping soundly, and Finn beside it, his head resting on the edge of the crib, eyes never leaving the baby. Margaret stood in the kitchen, a warm mug of chamomile tea in hand, watching the 2 souls who had come crashing into her life. One had been thrown away, the other had been forgotten. But now, in the peace of that moment, all 3 had found each other. She hung a sign on the porch later that week, a new name, carved by hand into a piece of cedar wood. Noel's Cottage, a home for the unexpected. Each morning, Finn followed her to the garden. Each evening, he lay at her feet while she read on the old rocking chair, Noel sleeping nearby. When the baby cried, Finn only had to nudge his hand, and he'd quit. When Noel laughed, Finn wagged his tail like he understood every bit of joy. Some moments didn't need words. One autumn afternoon, Margaret was folding laundry when she heard a burst of giggles from the living room. She turned around. On the rug, Finn was gently nudging a little ball of yarn toward Noel, who was now crawling, teetering with glee. The baby caught the ball, slammed it down, laughed, and Finn rolled it back again. The game went on for minutes. Just 2 brothers, one on 4 legs, one still unsteady on 2, sharing something perfect. Margaret clutched her chest, overwhelmed by the living, breathing proof that her once quiet house had become a place of joy. "No one needs to say it," she whispered. "We're already a family." Bellwood had never been the kind of town where shocking things happened. Life here was slow, careful, even a bit guarded. But on a crisp winter afternoon, at a local charity fair for single-parent families, everything changed. The fair was held in the town's central park. Colorful booths lined the pathways, baked goods, handmade crafts, second-hand books, and tiny sweaters on racks. Twinkling lights hung between tree trunks, and gentle acoustic music played from a small stage near the gazebo. The air was cold, but hearts were warm. People laughed easily. Children darted around with sticky hands. Grown-ups sipped hot cocoa and chatted about recent acts of kindness. In a modest corner, under a hand-painted sign that read, "Noel's Cottage, Rescuing the Forgotten," Margaret sat behind a table of hand-knitted bracelets and a small donation jar. Beside her, Noel, now nearly a year old, sat bundled in a stroller, cheeks rosy from the cold, and close at his side, Finn rested quietly, a deep green scarf around his neck stitched with the word Guardian. Someone joked, "That dog's not just a hero, he's Bellwood's living symbol of loyalty." Margaret smiled, but her eyes never left Finn, as if some part of her already knew something was about to happen. Around 3 p.m., as the crowd thickened and the music picked up, Finn began to change. He wasn't lying still like usual. His ears perked up, head raised, nose twitching toward the far end of the fair, specifically a storage tent behind the last row of booths. Margaret noticed immediately. "What is it, Finn?" she asked softly. Finn didn't answer, of course, but his eyes sharpened, focused like steel. Then came a low, warning whine. Not a growl, but something far more deliberate. A signal. Across the fair, a man in a black jacket and cap moved quickly against the flow of people. His eyes darted nervously. One hand clutched a backpack tightly. The other disappeared into his coat pocket. Finn rose to his feet, muscles tense. Then, in one explosive second, he charged. No one had time to react. A brown blur shot across the grass like a bullet. A growl tore through the noise. Finn launched at the man just as he yanked something metal and gleaming from his pocket. A folding knife. Screams erupted. People scattered. Children cried. Margaret clutched Noel to her chest. The man stumbled. The knife hit the ground. Finn latched onto his arm with terrifying precision, dragging him down next to the gift tent. Seconds later, 2 plainclothes officers, posted quietly for security, rushed in and pinned the suspect to the ground. When the chaos settled, the truth surfaced. That guy was a suspect in a weapons theft case from the next state, one officer confirmed. He slipped into the fair with clear intent. A woman whispered nearby, trembling, "If Finn hadn't moved when he did, God knows what could have happened." Margaret stood in silence. She looked down at Finn, panting heavily, a small streak of blood trickling from his shoulder, likely where the blade had grazed him. But he stood tall, gaze fixed firmly on Noel, still safe in her arms. She reached down, stroked his head, and said, just loud enough for others to hear, "You saved my son." Again. That night, after Noel had fallen asleep, Margaret sat in the living room with Finn curled at her feet. His shoulder was bandaged. He didn't whimper. He didn't need praise. She gently rubbed his back and whispered, "Not everyone's born a hero, but some are born to protect, without training, without orders, just because that's who they are." Finn didn't move, just let out a soft sigh and closed his eyes. But Margaret knew. As long as he drew breath, Finn would guard this family, with or without a spotlight, in darkness or light. After the incident at the fair, Finn's name no longer belonged just to Margaret, or even to Bellwood. A photo of the dog standing guard, eyes locked on the attacker, wound on his shoulder, was shared thousands of times online. News outlets picked up the story. Social media hailed him as the silent guardian. One major newspaper from out of state ran the headline, "From Stray to Legend, the dog that silenced a nation." But in the small cottage nestled on a quiet hillside, life remained simple. Margaret still rose early to cook breakfast, knit scarves, and brew chamomile tea. Noel, now giggling through his mornings, stretched his arms toward Finn the moment he woke, waiting for that gentle, reassuring lick on his hand. And Finn, though still healing, lay beneath the baby's stroller, eyes closed, ears always tuned to the world. Letters began arriving, far more than Margaret had expected, from single mothers, from adults who had once been abandoned children, from animal lovers who had given up on people. Each letter carried a story, a thank you, or a simple line. Thank you for reminding us that loyalty still exists. One quiet Saturday afternoon, Margaret was cleaning out the attic when she found an old photograph. Her younger self, standing in front of a chalkboard in her first classroom. Curly hair, bright eyes, a grin she hadn't seen in a mirror in years. She sat down on the wooden floor, running her fingers along the edges of the frame. "It's been so long," she whispered. "I forgot what I used to dream about." And from that forgotten dream, a new idea bloomed. The Holloway House, a place for the forgotten. Weeks later, Margaret stood in Bellwood's town hall, filing paperwork for a non-profit organization, a haven, small and simple, dedicated to fostering abandoned children and stray animals, helping them find not just shelter but family. The young clerk behind the desk blinked at her in disbelief. "You're starting all this with one dog and one baby?" Margaret chuckled softly. "We began with 2 souls. That's more than enough to change a small world." A wooden sign now hung at the gate, letters carved carefully by hand. "The Holloway House. Every soul deserves a home." The first photo on the center's wall wasn't of donors or ribbon cuttings. It was Finn, drenched in rain, curled around Noel's plastic crate the night they were found. The second photo showed him licking the baby's hand in the hospital. And the third, Margaret, Finn, and Noel beneath a golden maple tree in autumn, side by side. That spring, the Holloway House welcomed its first new arrivals. A baby girl named Lila was found near an abandoned bus station, and a grumpy old calico cat named Rufus was rescued outside a grocery store. Finn, now healthy again, immediately settled beside Lila's crib. Rufus, at first wary, glared at the dog from atop the counter, but by the next morning he was curled up against Finn's back like an old friend. Noel, now toddling around, clapped every time Finn yawned or Rufus stretched beside him. One day, a young journalist came to interview Margaret for a feature piece. "Do you think you saved Finn and Noel?" she asked. Margaret looked out the window. Where Finn was napping beneath the trees, Noel snuggled against his belly. "No," she replied gently. "They saved me." She paused, then added with quiet conviction, "I'm just continuing what Finn started. No recognition is needed, no questions asked, just being there when someone needs to be loved." That night, after putting Noel to bed, Margaret stepped outside and sat in the garden beside Finn. She rested her hand on his thick fur, now soft and full again, and felt the warmth rise through her palm. "2 more little ones are arriving tomorrow," she said softly. "Are we ready, old friend?" Finn didn't move, but his tail thumped once against the grass, a silent promise. As long as there's room in our hearts, there's room in our home. Time passed, not loudly, not quickly, but like autumn slowly giving way to winter. Noel, once barely larger than a bundle of blankets, was now walking to elementary school with a backpack that seemed too big for his shoulders. And Finn was changing too. His back had begun to bow, and his steps had grown slower. Patches of white fur dusted his muzzle like the early frost. But his eyes, those warm, steady eyes, remained the same, alert, knowing, kind. By now, the Holloway House had grown. A dozen small souls lived under its roof, children from scattered beginnings, and animals once forgotten. But every one of them knew one unspoken rule. If you wanted to get near Noel, you had to pass Finn's watchful gaze. Noel had a habit. Every day after school, he would lie on the porch, reading stories aloud to Finn. On rainy afternoons, they curled together in the living room, Finn resting his head on Noel's legs like he'd done from the very beginning. One spring day, after finishing a fairy tale about a brave dog saving a prince, Noel closed the book and leaned close. "You know, Finn," he whispered, "I think they wrote that story about you." Finn didn't stir. He just let out a soft sigh, tail flicking once. He'd heard it all before. Then, one morning, Margaret woke earlier than usual. She padded downstairs to make tea, only to realize Finn wasn't under the table where he always slept. She searched the rooms. Silence. The back door was slightly ajar. In the yard, under the golden maple tree where he loved to rest, she saw him. Finn lay curled in the grass. His body was leaner now, his breathing quiet. The breeze played gently across his graying fur, like nature itself was bidding him goodbye. Margaret didn't cry right away. She sat beside him and placed her hand gently on his head. "You're home now, aren't you?" News of Finn's passing spread, not with grief but with memory. A framed photo was placed in the main hallway of the Holloway house. Beneath it is a simple plaque. "Finn, the nameless night watcher, the first brick in our home." That same week, Margaret found a note in Noel's little diary. Just one sentence, scrawled in uneven handwriting. Finn didn't disappear. He just went to guard the kids who haven't come here yet. 3 months later, at Bellwood Central Park, the same spot where Finn had once tackled a man to protect the town, a statue was quietly unveiled. A bronze dog, lying calmly, eyes turned toward a sleeping child beside him. The plaque below simply read, "The Guardian." People began calling it Finn's Corner. Children played there under his stone gaze. Strays sometimes curled up at its base, as if they knew. Back at the cottage on the hill, life continued. Noel still reads books. Now, he rested his head on a pillow Margaret had sewn from Finn's old blanket. Margaret still made tea, occasionally glancing toward the yard and smiling softly to herself. And the Holloway house still welcomed new souls, each carrying a scar, and each leaving with a little more light. One late summer afternoon, Noel was showing 2 new arrivals around the garden. He paused beneath the maple tree, the same one where Finn had taken his final nap. "This," he told them, "is the most special spot. It's where the very first dog here taught me what love means, and that you don't have to be perfect to be someone's protector." What Noel didn't know was that Margaret was watching from the upstairs window, a cup of tea in hand. Her eyes blurred, but her lips curled into a peaceful smile. And through the quiet, she whispered, "Thank you, Finn. You didn't just save a baby. You opened a door for the whole world."